So for Twilio, especially in the earlier stages, when the company was founded from 2008, Jeff Lawson really actually was the chief evangelist, as well as the founder and co-founder and CEO of the company. He would do these 5-minute demos where he was just showing off how to, at first Twilio wasn't even text messages. It was phone calls. So, he would show outbound phone calls and inbound phone calls and actually call everybody's phone in the audience, right? He'd have, so the demo was very carefully, scripted to be just 5 minutes to get to the point and really show people what was possible. He would actually like live code. He would put up a phone number. Everyone would call that from their own cell phone. And then he would write a few lines of code and it would call everybody in the room and put them all into a conference call together. Incredible ability to combine, writing some code with an action that happens in the real world.
Welcome to another episode of the If Then podcast. This is your host, Developer, and today we are joined by Matt Makai, VP of Developer Relations at Experience at LaunchDarkly, formerly at Assembly AI. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, Matt, we have this little tradition. We ask all of our guests about their most memorable meals. What's yours?
For me, I was living in San Francisco back in 2017, and my wife and I flew to Hawaii. It was a very special vacation. I found out I was going to have a son, but we ate at this little place called Mama's Fish House in Maui. Very special, gorgeous views over the water. Actually, pretty like famous, sort of like I don't want to say hole in the wall restaurant, but it's like it's got a very special vibe, and just incredible sushi dinner. And of course, everything that happened to Maui since then always makes me think of that restaurant. So that was an incredible meal and restaurant.
That is an awesome story. No, thank you for sharing that. So Matt, before we dive in, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, maybe a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Matt Makai. I actually just consider myself to be a software developer. I still code every single day. I have been coding kind of crazy since I was like 3 years old. My dad was a mechanical and electrical engineer, always had a computer. I wanted to play video games on the computer, so I basically taught myself how to code and used DOS back then. So it was just a natural transition for me to do computer science and then become a programmer. So I did a J2EE, a lot of Java coding for the first few years of my career. Got in, and then at night, I was like starting to dabble in Python when I was a J2EE developer, and I was like, I can get more done in a couple hours with Python towards what I want to work on than like 8-9 hours in the office with Java. Yeah. So I was like, I need to like learn different programming languages, and that just opened it up my own capabilities as a programmer. So that was really the start of my career before I got into what I am in now, which is an offshoot of that, which is developer relations and developer experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I know writing public, static, void, main, string, args in Java, it's like by the time you're done, it's night.
There's a lot of boilerplate and stuff. I mean, Java has a ton of advantages in many ways, but for what I personally wanted to code, Python just happened to work really well for me. And then obviously the explosion with DevOps tools, data science, machine learning, all that stuff, it just happened to all like kind of coincide in Python. So so I was basically a heads down software developer for 10 years. When I was, I realized when I was coding a lot and I was doing some consulting, I could actually just be, before they called it a digital nomad, I essentially was that. I packed all my stuff in my car. I drove around the US for 5 months straight, no permanent address for 5 months. And I made my own self-defined project called Coding Across America, which is still a website that's available today, codingacrossamerica.com. And I just like talked to software developers all over the US. I was like, what's it like to be a software developer in Memphis, Tennessee, San Francisco, Seattle, Boulder. It was a great way for me to like just meet a ton of people, just grab coffee, grab lunch with them, just find out about what it was like all over the country being a software developer, the different like cultures, startup cultures, things like that. And then I met a bunch of folks from Twilio. And then when I finished my trip, they asked me if I'd be interested in being a developer evangelist for Twilio, and that got me on my 9+ year journey as a part of developer relations at Twilio.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So I did that at Twilio for 9 years. I was developer evangelist, ran developer evangelism, and built a huge developer content program. One of those programs in developer content was called Twilio Voices. They still run it, and it essentially we work with the team works with developers from around the world. They code some applications, they write a draft of a blog post, and they work with an experienced software developer who's an editor to help them publish that on the Twilio blog itself. It drives a ton of results for Twilio. So I built that program and some other content related programs, and then eventually actually went over to Assembly AI, which builds AI models, like actually is training models. So we train on, TPUs, so the Google hardware. We also trained on H100s previously. We just came out with a new state-of-the-art model called Universal One, which is the definitive, state-of-the-art speech recognition model right now. Kind of competes there with Whisper from OpenAI. And I run developer relations and experience for Assembly AI, and just recently accepted a position to do the same for over at LaunchDarkly.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because especially the part where because I can imagine how within a team, say the Twilio team, it would get kind of hard for just the internal group to keep scaling all of the content everywhere. So, and you had shared a few other creative strategies that you have undertaken. So I am really excited that we'll get to talk about some of that in today's podcast. It's awesome. So Matt, what have you and the team been working on most recently?
Yeah, so the scope of my team at Assembly AI is really spans the gamut from SDKs, the open API spec, code integrations. So like Assembly AI is built into LangChain, Llama Index, Haystack, just a whole laundry list of these typically like LLM frameworks, other developer services like Zapier and Make. So we do a lot of the actual like coding to create those. And then we really, on the developer relations side, are really focused on driving the business, driving revenue, product usage through developers adopting by signing up and then adding Assembly AI to their application. Very similar model to Twilio. It's a web API. You're going to use most likely the either raw HTTP calls in the framework of your the programming language of your choice, or we have multiple SDKs that allow you to very quickly write a couple lines of code, and you've baked in the API into your application. So that's primarily what we work on. At the end of the day, it's all about just driving really high growth for the company, because these are software startups, VC-backed startups.
Yeah.
And so something has to be driving that growth year over year. And for Assembly AI, likewise with Twilio, it's developers who are really the customers.
Well, this is great and really resonates a lot, because I am also very, very engineer. So that approach makes a lot of sense to me. So your team, it's primarily segmented, like you're having to do more marketing facing work as well as pretty heavy product work, right? Just based on supporting so many SDKs and clients that developers would use to interact with Assembly. How do you structure the team?
Yeah, so it's actually almost two answers. There's developer relations, which I consider to be more marketing activities, really driving the business, the product adoption, customer acquisition, and more engineering and product activities, which is developer experience. So the team essentially operates in like the folks kind of opt in to one of two parts of that, but it's not a hard and fast rule, because let me give you a very specific example. Someone on my team built the LangChain integration for Python. Then he wrote the tutorial that shows you how to use it. Wrote the announcement blog post. Hey, we're baked into LangChain. And he had actually written the code that got in and did the pull request to get it baked into LangChain. And then he's doing a lot of the promotion around it. So there's a lot of coding to build the software, make those capabilities available and much easier for developers to use in their applications. And then there's the promotion side. And so folks on the team typically do the entire stack of activities. And then often Assembly AI has an extremely popular YouTube channel, fantastic content on there, very like AI focused, developer focused. And so, either the developer relations person will either do a video. Some folks can even do, written video content and write the code, or they'll pass on a script to someone who can actually like record that, someone else on the team. So in some ways it's like, I don't know, I don't totally want to overload the term full stack, but that's really the way that I see it, is like almost like full stack kind of developer experience, developer relations. Yeah. You're coding the application, you're doing the pull request, you're interacting with the open source community or another company, and then you're actually doing the promotional activities to make sure that developers actually are aware of like what that new capability is.
This is very interesting to me, right? Because like a lot of us look at DevRel as just another distribution mechanism of sorts to reach more developers, thus fueling growth and therefore revenue. But in your case, like how you're actually thinking about it, which I like the integration with a Lang chain, for example, like that is essentially its own distribution channel of sorts, or can be. And now your team is also taking on the responsibility of doing things like I think this is incredibly cool. Nice.
Well, there's a shortcut way to think about it, which I think is actually the most authentic way to think about this work. I'm a developer. Everyone on the team is a developer. If you're excited about doing something, you're genuinely interested in writing the code and doing a pull request against a framework that you're using, you probably do that. You can hook the company service, the API, into that framework or that open source project in a way that makes it easier for developers. Like just go do that. Like I don't consider, it's not marketing per se. It's like you have a genuine interest. Like you use that product or that service or that open source project. And then just naturally, you're going to want to teach other people how to do it. Right. And just by virtue of doing all those things, like you can acquire customers as long as your product is good. And SWI has a really great product. Twilio has a really great product. Although regulatory issues have sort of gotten in the way of that more recently. But old school Twilio had a really great product for developers. Assembly AI has a really great product for developers. The easier you can make it for developers to use those products, and you're solving a genuine problem, like you're putting yourself in the right position. You're not marketing per se, or like trying to shove your stuff in front of other people. You're just like, this is useful to others. I want to like teach you how to do it.
I think this actually leads pretty well into another question I wanted to ask you. It's like, there's a lot of stuff that we do in these very early stage companies, startups, that definitely gut feel says this is the right thing to do. How do you back that up with some set of like metrics or other signals that you are truly headed in the right path? Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it comes down to whether you are your target audience. So this is where a lot of companies have trouble with this. They say, I have definitely talked to startup founders who are not developers and they want to build a product for developers, and they themselves cannot evangelize their own product. Evangelize in a good way, not in sort of a, like a hacky way. If you're your target audience and your intuition is telling you that this is the right direction to go, because you yourself could, be that person who is the potential customer, you're probably going to do it. You'll go about it the right way. I think the data will kind of show. The one thing I think that's interesting about startups, I often have this conversation with startup founders, which is like, they're like, oh, well, the data is telling me go this direction. And it's like, well, what data? And they're like, oh, well, these are my like first 10 customers. And it's like, I mean, is that really a valid sample size? So like, I think having a very broad awareness of the total like developer population, it's 25 million developers, roughly 25 to 30 million professional developers worldwide, about 6 million of those in the United States / North America. Just having a broad understanding of what developers are doing, and this applies whether you're developers or your customers or just customers in general, like that's going to lead you down the right path. In combination with your own data of your own product. You can't just like look at the data that you have as a small startup and expect it to lead you always in the right direction. Of course, it's just not representative of your potential customer base more broadly. So I think that's actually like a little bit of the balance maybe there is like, you have to follow a little bit of your gut feel if you are your target audience, or you have to trust the customers that you're talking to, assuming they are your target audience, and then just try to square that with the data that you currently have and see if you can get broader sources of data.
Tell me one thing, Matt, like obviously the both of us have used Twilio, and you, I'm sure, more than me. What sorts of tools are you using these days? Like to keep track of some of these metrics as assembly, like I'm sure during your tenure that the team has grown pretty significantly. A lot of work has been done, new users, customers added. What tools have you like turned to get some level of signal about like, okay, directionally, did we achieve what we kind of wanted to achieve, or have we learned some new lessons? And why
Yeah.
those tools? Why do you use them?
Yeah. So I like to think of input metrics and output metrics. The input metrics are the things that are directly within your control. And those are things that are kind of like when you measure them, they're sort of like operational team metrics. So, for example, like
Mhm.
number of blog posts published, number of tutorials published, number of YouTube videos published, number of developer events attended, per week, per month, whatever that time period is. So you can kind of measure, and I often will describe it as like kind of similar to counting lines of code. It's like it can be a valuable metric, but you have to be a little bit careful with it because it's like obviously if you publish 100 blog posts, but you lower your quality standards to do that, it'll lead you down the wrong path. But generally, you have to have some level of consistency in the actions that you take in order to like have meaningful results out of
Yeah.
them. And so like I look at those as like input metrics. I actually have not found a ton of tools that allow you to kind of understand your input metrics. So I built my tool PlushCap, which is at plushcap.com. And really what I built that with the hypothesis that uh, essentially like every developer focused company that has a self-service motion for its business, um, in order to have a low cost of customer acquisition, they have to spread all of the effort that they put into, promotional materials, blog posts, YouTube videos, everything. They basically have to spread that investment across acquiring the largest number of customers possible, so it could get their cost of customer acquisition down. So essentially, like if like for me, outside of a business, I should
Yeah.
be able to see and take in all of these signals and understand how a business is actually operating. Only a developer focused company, only a self service business. That's my area of expertise. So this PlushCap tool, it scrapes all of the data off of a website. It'll scrape all the blog posts. It'll scrape all the YouTube videos. I have some other signals that I plan to put in there soon as well. And then you can sort of like compare and contrast and look at different patterns of how businesses are operating. And that really captures sort of the input metrics. If you're running a really good developer relations program, developer marketing teams, like 90 to 95% of their work should just be easy to measure because it's public. It's a blog post that's published. It's a tutorial that's in the docs. It's a new docs page that's been created, right? So it's like, um, it's not that hard to measure this stuff. It mostly just required me building a tool in Python with Django. And I just host the website so that it's easy for anybody to use it. You just have to like suck in all these signals and kind of make sense of them. And the
Yeah.
tool's not perfect to continue to like work on it. It's like kind of my primary side project, but that's the input metrics. So that's like kind of the first half of your question. And then the second half is
Yeah.
really the output metrics,
Output. Yeah.
which, that's a little bit of a different side. I often consider those to be indirect metrics. So there's a real spectrum of these. So on one hand, you kind of have the top of the funnel signals, the things that marketing tends to look at. Impressions, if you really want to go really, search impressions on YouTube or Google or DuckDuckGo, and page views, unique user sessions, signups. Then you start to get into what are often referred to as life cycle events. So a sign up will lead to an API, the first successful API call, 10 API calls, 100 API calls. That is often how API-based businesses measure success. Or, in a seat-based model, which some developer-focused companies have, it'll be based off of, usage patterns that get them to sort of like success from a freemium tier onto a paid tier. So different businesses have different breakdowns of kind of like what constitutes success. At Twilio, it was 10 or more API calls was sort of like that initial, developer has been successful with one product. So they've sent and received 10 text messages or whatever it is, or done 10 calls or something like that.
Yeah.
So each business kind of has to define like, where is that dividing line between like, sign up and like when they're successful. And so then eventually you connect that down to the customer, paying customers and revenue of the business. and then the growth trajectory of what that business looks like over time. So I really separate the input metrics from those output metrics, and those output metrics you would have to really map from the very top funnel stuff all the way down to what really matters in most of these businesses, which is what is the statement of cash flows, and what does that ultimately mean for the future trajectory of the business.
Yeah. No, this is very interesting. Do you have some sentiment on, like, from your time at Twilio, what led to developers falling in love with just being able to call an API with a phone number and a string that you wanted to send someone, and it got there? Like, what was the thing that worked?
Yeah, so we'll get into tactics, right? So developer relations tactics. So what really works is, or what worked for Twilio at that point in time, like there's a lot of different tactics that a developer relations team can apply based off of what metrics they want to try to drive. So for Twilio, especially in the earlier stages, when the company was founded from 2008, Jeff Lawson really actually was the chief evangelist, as well as the founder and co-founder and CEO of the company. He would do these 5-minute demos where he was just showing off how to, at first Twilio wasn't even text messages, it was phone calls. So he would show outbound phone calls and inbound phone calls and actually call everybody's phone in the audience, right? He'd have, so the demo was very carefully, scripted to be just 5 minutes to get to the point and really show people what was possible. He would actually like live code. He would put up a phone number. Everyone would call that from their own cell phone. And then he would write a few lines of code and it would call everybody in the room and put them all into a conference call together. Incredible ability to combine writing some code with an action that happens in the real world. And I think that was ultimately like the promise of a lot of these APIs is you write some code and it takes action in the real world. Now, not all APIs are like that, but Twilio was able to really successfully demonstrate a lot of that, magic. It really was the magic of Twilio. Like, you ask a developer who had never seen Twilio before, how do you do a phone call in PHP? How do you receive a phone call in Java? I don't know. Like I literally, as an experienced developer, would be like, I have no idea. Twilio made that possible in 2-3 lines of code, and then obviously added on SMS and some other capabilities as well. So that was a very specific tactic that was deployed at events. Developer events. So the developer evangelism team was doing, on order of 400 to 500 events per year globally. I will say that eventually you reach some peak capacity. And my guess or my hypothesis is that pre-pandemic capacity of developer events, high quality developer events that you really want to attend, was high. There was more of those events pre-pandemic than there are currently now. And maybe that comes back as a tactic. I think, I've attended some events recently in New York City, and I'll be going to one in San Francisco for LaunchDarkly's Galaxy conference. Like, I think it's coming back in certain circles, but I will say, like, I'm located in Washington, DC. There is essentially no very limited developer events in the city. So, I think the way to sum this up is there are certain tactics that can be deployed by developer marketing, developer relations teams that drive certain outcomes for the business. And the outcome that Twilio was looking for was brand awareness, because you're doing a really great demo, and then getting developers just excited. So we used to call it inspiring and equipping developers. The inspiration of like seeing like, oh, the magic of your phone ringing. And then the equipping them, like literally showing them the code, like you can write these 3 lines of code yourself and do the exact same thing in your application. And that would drive a ton of, it would drive the initial developers at that event to actually try the API. And then when that experience was magical for them, they were able to replicate that magic. Then the word of mouth really spread for, Twilio product adoption over time. And, it's become harder lately because the regulatory burden, due to spam calls and spam text messages, a very good reason why it's a lot harder to do those types of demos today. But, back when it was sort of a smaller thing, less regulated, it was really incredible to see some of the 5-minute demos that, Developer Evangelism and Jeff Lawson would do.
I've actually seen a couple of posts about Jeff Lawson's video on LinkedIn. And I think it was one of them was the last time for him actually doing one of his 5-minute demos. It's just epic.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely he taught the evangelists, and this is, I think, a
Yeah,
really big takeaway for startup founders, is you should be your chief evangelist. I've talked to startup founders who are like, I want to go hire, a developer evangelist. What should I look for? And I'm like, well, show me your demo, or show
yeah,
me how you evangelize your own product. And if they can't do it, I'm very skeptical that they could get someone else
that's the
who
problem.
could do it for them. So I think that's like a key. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think it is, to me, the easiest path to, building a really successful developer
Yeah,
relations team is like if the founder of the company can really show why something is magical, why something is
yeah,
useful to developers, then you can build a team around that tactic.
this makes a lot of sense. Because we had gotten into this while talking about metrics, Matt. Like, do you, and we were also talking about a few tactics, anything that you might recall for when you saw a metric or some signal change somewhere that led you to killing off a project or starting to do more of something?
Hmm. Yeah, I do actually. Uh, so when I was at Twilio, uh, I was doing a lot of events. My first year at Twilio, I went to 86 events,
Whew.
and it was a lot. I was on a plane a lot. It was awesome and exhausting at the same time. I was very wedded to events. So was the company. That said, it was pretty clear that when we were not at events, that we should write content, really deep technical tutorials. And we started to discover that those technical tutorials on the Twilio blog, when done in a certain way, were driving a huge number of signups and API usage. So it was very clear that there was a different tactic that was competing for our time. And there was a point in which we had like a discussion about it as a developer relations team, I'd say 15 of us. And it was like, maybe we should be a little more balanced with our events and our technical content that we're publishing. Maybe that would provide better results. And I was super against it. I was like, no, like we should do events because that's what we're exceptional at. And if we want to do technical content, like I don't know, like that. If I don't think we can do both at a really exceptional level, because that's the thing is like generally companies, developer focused companies, are known for one thing. Twilio was known for developer events. Stripe was known for docs. DigitalOcean was known for their technical tutorials.
Tech talks. Yep.
Thousands of technical tutorials. These are not just things that I like say, oh, they're known for. Like they're literally in the S1 filings, the IPO filings of Twilio, of DigitalOcean, of I'm sure Stripe, whenever they decide that they one IPO. I'm sure it'll be in their S1 about their developer motion and their docs and the importance of their
Talks.
docs to their business, right? For Assembly AI, it's the YouTube channel, like huge reach with the YouTube channel. You kind of get one shot to be exceptional at something, and the companies that really kind of fall off are the ones that kind of spread themselves too thin. So
Yep.
for me, back in like this was like 2017. I'd been at the 2016. I'd been at the company for a couple of years, and it was like we should probably do more technical content, and the developer evangelists are going to do it, and we're maybe going to do less events. And I was like, I think we're going to spread ourselves too thin. Well, lo and behold, like a year later, I had a little bit of an opportunity to like do more technical content, and it was working really well. And we actually, I think, approached it the right way. We said evangelists still go to events, and they sometimes write content when they can, but we're going to spin up a new team, a developer content team that will just do content, and they will do content at a level that is, meets that high quality bar that we expect from developer evangelists actually going to events. The fortuitous
Mhm.
part of this was that when the pandemic hit, we had already been doing developer content at a very high level. We had hundreds of blog posts that were out there. Obviously, our docs were very solid as well. So we had the majority of the site traffic was driven by the blog and the docs, developers finding us in the programming language of their choice for the use case of their choice. When the pandemic hit, it was like off to the races. Like developers were like finding us, demoing, digital transformation, communication stuff
Yeah.
while they were working remotely. And just it drove a massive increase in the business because developers could just get to success in like a few minutes because we laid everything out in front of them with the technical content and the docs. And so I think back to your original question of like how did this sort of impact sort of like do you see something, do you not do something? Like
Yeah.
I would say I actually argued against doing that at first because I thought it would take away from really being exceptional in one area that the company was known for. But it actually turned out like eventually once you reach a certain critical mass of a company, like you're going to cap out. Like we capped out at 400 or 500 events a year. So actually adding developer content was actually a really smart strategy because it allowed us
Yeah.
to get past that natural barrier, that limit that otherwise we would have run into and we would have like kind of not seen any more
Yeah.
product adoption. And then when the pandemic hit, I mean, we would have been really kind of screwed because the events totally shut down and they really haven't still
Yep.
come back to the level they were before. I'll give you
Speaking.
another
Oh
example.
no.
I'll give
Yeah.
you another quick
Yeah. Yeah.
example. So let's do something that's a little more recent. Assembly AI. I was very fortunate to know the founder and advise the company
Yeah.
before I joined. So for me, when I left Twilio, got laid off from Twilio, which was great. I was ready to leave, and they were incredibly generous with their severance packages and all that stuff. So it made everything super easy for me. I actually got laid off on my birthday, which was
Uh,
fine, but it was kind of hilarious. It was the hardest part was just like leaving a really great team. But when I finished at Twilio and then eventually joined Assembly AI, first thing I did was demo the product to the executive leadership team and said, it takes us like 20 lines. It takes a developer 20 lines of code to use an API to transcribe an audio file. Like this is never going to work. We didn't have any SDKs. So it's like the first thing we got to do if we really want to drive this business at scale is get SDKs. Because for most developers, it has to be like 2 lines of code with the SDK/helper library, whatever you want to call it. So that was where we did make a very intentional business decision. It was based off of like, here's the current status quo. It's incredibly difficult for any developer to truly use this product. We need to invest as a company in SDKs. Now we have 5
yeah.
SDKs at Assembly. We built them in less than a year. We have 2 more on the way. Like that's an incredible transformation. And like I can only say like the metrics behind the scenes bear out. Based on the product adoption, the number of paid customers, the customer acquisition, the stickiness of the product now, reduced churn. Like it was definitely the right decision to do that. So there's another example of like just really having conviction in like
Yeah.
what you invest in, and having to make trade-offs. And sometimes you make those investments by showing what's not working,
Yeah.
and how that's going to really hold back the business.
Because like this is actually one area that I've also struggled with a little bit, right? Because as an engineer, it's like, no, but if you do this, you get these 5 other things as well. It's like, no one cares. Get them in as fast as possible. We'll talk about the rest later.
Yeah, there's a balance, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't. I will say that like it just to me it really does come down to that. Like
Yeah.
when I think about developer experience, I think about I'll just put you the framing for the developer experience. And I don't maybe this will kind of get to the point of like whether you should or shouldn't do something. But to me, like the developer experience has to be like a developer is probably going to give you maybe 15 to 20 minutes with your product
Yeah.
if they think that it's going to solve a problem that they have. In rare cases, they may be, have heard of it word of mouth from somebody else. And so they're willing to give you some time as well. But generally, I think like you have to get them to success within at most 15 to 20 minutes. But if you can get them to success in 5 minutes, then they'll probably give you a chance to like teach them something more advanced. And that more advanced thing may be the thing that you were talking about just building. Like that's the sticky part or the real value of your product, right? So I think that is often what I think of as my framing for developers is a developer like I was, where I was building some software at 6 o'clock at night on a Friday, just trying to go out with my friends or go see my family or whatever it is. And I just have to finish that final feature in the sprint. And I come across a product. Is that product going to get me to success in 20 minutes and I can go home? Or is it going to frustrate me for hours and I'm going to hate them forever? That is I think the crux of developer experience. And it also informs whether you should build those features or not. And, whether those are going to complicate the experience or whether, they're simply additive once a developer gets the basics of it.
Yeah, because I like similarly, I think my way of looking at it might be a little more extreme. It's like we are there for the developers when they are stuck at 2 a.m. on a Friday night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who is there to help you, and how can I get you unblocked as fast as possible? And I think this essentially became an extract of what Nike used to do. Like Phil Knight, I don't know if you've heard, in one of his talks to, it was a large group of people somewhere in Portland, and his thing was, made people stand up in the audience. It's like, how many of you run once a week? Some people, and if you don't run once a week, sit down. So some people keep standing twice a week. Some more people sit down. And then thrice a week, there's only a handful of people still standing in the audience. And then he says, you're the people we actually build stuff for. And the others are just there. So
Yeah.
I can draw parallels here, and it really resonates with me. This is awesome. Matt, you were mentioning something before we started the call today. It was essentially around how, again, thanks to the pandemic, a lot of teams are now very, very distributed at their core. But it's almost like DevRel was that way even before the pandemic. How have you experienced this through your time at Twilio, Assembly, and now as you move into LaunchDarkly?
Yeah. There's a few facets to this. So I think at maybe the simplest way to explain it, connecting it to the business, is that developers are located all over the world. And if you want to authentically interact with your communities and be a part, not just interact, like part of your community. Like I'm a Python developer. I go to PyCon. Like I'm not a PyCon right now. I'm kind of bummed about that. Like I love talking to other Python developers and being a member of that community. The only way you can authentically do that and truly be like in your communities is actually to be distributed. Because like, if you're in Berlin, you can, interact with your fellow developers in Berlin much easier than if you are located in, in New York and you have to fly over to Berlin, right? So running distributed teams when it comes to DevRel is really, it makes the return on investment easier to get, positive, either positive, because you could have negative return on investment doing like the events and stuff like that if you're doing the wrong events. It makes it easier to get a positive return on investment or a very high positive investment on return on investment, because you're spending less on plane tickets, hotels, you're less frankly like wear and tear on the people that are actually like going to these events, and it frees up their time to do other things rather than being on a plane and being exhausted. You can go to write a technical tutorial and then go to a meetup at night or something like that. So it opens up more avenues when you're globally distributed. It certainly makes it a little bit harder to build a cohesive team culture, and that's why I just always I learned this at Twilio. Like you have to get the team together at least once a quarter, so you can just really make sure that you have really strong bonds. I think that's kind of the simplest way to describe why DevRel should generally be a remote, distributed remote operation. So pre-pandemic, Twilio got that right. I think a lot of companies actually did recognize that. Now there's a bit of a backlash to a lot of the remote work. I think at some places, maybe a little bit of an extreme backlash. I think we'll probably end up in a happier medium. Maybe another couple of years go by, but like some companies. So like I don't know. I'll give you a couple of examples. Like I know companies that have been hiring for DevRel leadership positions or even developer DevRel, IC positions, individual contributor positions that are like San Francisco only or like South Bay only. And it's like, I mean, to be fair, like if you don't have anybody in that area, you probably should have somebody.
Sure.
But like I don't want to like call out any specific companies, but some companies are so adamant, like you have to be in San Francisco. The downside of that is, it's an echo chamber. I lived in San Francisco. I love it. It's a great city, but it's an echo chamber. And so you end up with a set of values and a set of just the way that you speak about software development that is not representative of the world at large. And the only way that you can truly include all the different viewpoints of, super legacy mainframe developers all the way through, I don't know, whatever the new JavaScript web framework is really to have people that are globally distributed and respect each other's disciplines. And so that's like really another argument for why like You should have a globally distributed team. It's the only way to ensure that 25 to 30 million professional developers worldwide, plus all the other hobbyists and students and things like that, you can speak their language, and you can empathize with their problems and the things that they are focused on. If you only focus on San Francisco, then you will never reach your total addressable market, because you'll never speak the language of most of the developers that are out there. So that's another reason.
Yeah.
And then I'll give you one more reason, which is there's a lot of talent out there, and that talent often lives in places that you wouldn't expect. I think it's actually a little bit, this actually used to be like my secret. It's not really a secret anymore, but it used to be like at Twilio, I could hire folks in, pretty small cities that were exceptional developers. Maybe they had to be there because they had to care for a parent, or, that was where their family was, or whatever reason, or they just wanted to be in a different place. And you essentially, as long as you treat them well and you pay them appropriately, like you'll never lose them, right? Like they appreciate that opportunity, and they're going to work their tails off to make sure that they do a really great job. So I think it's a little bit harder now because there are more companies that are willing to do remote. But it used to be back in the day where like remote was like very rare, that it was like, I knew if I could hire some insanely great people, there's no competition for that talent. And you just have to do right by them, and they'll do right by you. And you got a really great mix for execution. Yeah,
I have a lot of thoughts on this topic that we'll probably have to record another podcast for, so I won't get into it now. But no, this is awesome to hear. Because another thing you mentioned over there, right? Like being close to the developer, like that way you're actually listening to their pains, trying to figure out how to solve some of their pains with your software. Twilio Assembly or LaunchDarkly. But now, when you think about ROI for your team and how to demonstrate that more internally, be it for increasing headcount or whatever else within the company, right? What sort of signals are you looking for over there? Like, how do you know that, okay, hey, this event that we just did, we should really not do this ever again? Or maybe let's not do it next year, and then we can revisit it after. How do you figure that out?
I think I'm not sure there's a conventional wisdom on this. I'll give you my perspective, which is I'm really looking at things as a portfolio of activities, and then you can demonstrate the return on investment of, different slices. So, the developer event slice, or the developer content slice, or the YouTube. I think the answer is, frankly, it varies. So let me just actually rattle off some examples, and I think that'll actually tell a better story than me just kind of sort of theoretically talking about this. So, an Assembly, really popular YouTube channel, definitely like and subscribe. It's awesome. They've done amazing work, the folks on that channel. And it's really hard to track attribution for YouTube, because most people who hear about you through YouTube are going to just open a new browser tab and search for your company name, right? So you end up with this breakage in the attribution funnel. So what we did was, when you sign up for Assembly, we just have, it's really 3 fields. It's username or email, password, what password you want, set your password, and where'd you hear about us? And you'd be amazed at the number of the percentage of signups that come from YouTube. Mostly because YouTube is a tactic in which it's hard to get right. Once you get it right for a period of time, it's like a huge, it's like a snowball accumulating as it's rolling downhill. Like your organic reach just explodes in a good way on there. And most companies suck at it because they're too corporate about it or whatever, or they don't have good people working on it. Or I shouldn't say good people. It's just people who aren't YouTubers. You have to hire the right talent who are exceptional at what they do, and they understand the algorithm, they understand how to create the content, but they're also technical. They have technical credibility. Really hard mix to get right. So
because one thing I've also been noticing to that point of yours, the technical depth that you need to produce amazing content feels a little different from the technical depth and the style of communication that you need for YouTube, which is interesting.
Yes and no. I mean, I think the thing is I can give you the attributes that I hire for. And the number one is technical credibility. You have to be a developer if you want to do developer relations and developer experience. There's just no way around it. Like you can't have empathy for a developer if you are not a developer. Um, it's not a teachable thing. Like it's not something you can just learn about from a book. I have punched my monitor more times than I care to admit because I'm so frustrated with the code and why it's not working. Luckily, I don't do that as much because I feel like I used to do that with CRTs and they were a lot more rugged than the LCD screens of today. But that's the type of empathy that you have to have. So my hiring attributes are like technical credibility, first and foremost. Second is curiosity, because I don't know, like I'm not going to be able to tell. I'll give you a good example of this. Like I can't tell as a Python developer, like a C# developer, what specifically they should build. Like we can talk about it at a high level. Like what code integration should you build for the C# community? I don't know that community. So someone who is naturally curious and really understands and is really deep in their community, that's the only way that they're going to know what's appropriate to build. And then humility and empathy, I think, go hand in hand. I mentioned empathy, like what you get from technical credibility, but humility is just really important. I think the more that you learn as a developer, you should feel like the more humble you should feel, because it's like I know very little. I've been programming for like decades. I know very little. It is a little scary how the more you learn, the less you feel like you know. And as long as you internalize that humility, that will help you to like really connect with other folks. And then just the last one is just a hustle. Just that it goes, I think, hand in hand also with curiosity. Like these attributes are interrelated, but hustle is just like, you just kind of roll with it. Like things aren't like a lot of times with like DevRel, like you're getting a lot of different feedback, you're getting a lot of different signals, you're often working on product launches. Like you just got to be willing to like step up and be like, let's make this awesome. Like let's just go crush this. Let's do this because like we think that like this is awesome for developers. We want developers to be able to use this. I have a couple other attributes, but I'll just say like that. I think maybe we'll connect this back to the original like part of the conversation, which is just like, how do you measure some of these things? When you have the right people in place, the measurement is actually the easy part, because they're executing at such a high level and their output is so visible. And like, that's why part of the reason why I built PlushCap, that you can just see it. So it's up to you as a manager, as a leader, to just roll up all of the execution in a way that is connected to the business. So you can really tie that direct connection between developer adoption of your product all the way through to revenue and all the way through future growth plans. And actually think about it in the same way that in some ways like sales thinks about it. Like, what is the leverage for each person on the team as far as like, what's the headcount cost, the operating expenses, and then what is the future, revenue that they can actually bring in based off of the product adoption that they drive. So that's really, I think, the like where you need to get to if you're running like a really high functioning, high execution developer relations and developer experience operation.
Yeah. Matt, I wish we could go on for another half an hour or so, but I know we are also getting close to time. It's been a bunch of amazing nuggets that you have dropped for our listeners in this on this episode, and I really look forward to staying in touch with you, man. This was a fantastic session.
Likewise, great questions. Yeah, I mean, this really gets to the heart of the matter. I guess I'll just add one other quick thing, which is like, I don't think there's enough of this like type of conversation for developer relations. I think I've always thought about it in this way, in part because even though I'm a software developer, I did computer science and all that stuff, I also went to like business school. So to me, it's always about like the business objectives and connect. And it's the leader really needs to connect the two, the great work that's being done serving developers and the business objectives together. I think, unfortunately, DevRel and developer experience has gotten a little bit of a bad rap in its focus on like community or community metrics, things like that. Like, I think these types of things are actually really important so that the craft of like developer relations, the practice of developer relations can actually be viewed as like a maturing discipline, as opposed to one in which maybe it was just like, oh yeah, that was just like a thing that startups did in 2012 or whatever. Like there is a tremendous amount of like business value and growth that can be created from these activities. So yeah, hopefully I was able to shed a little light on this stuff, both for startups and for larger companies.
Yes. Okay. Now, Matt, thank you. Thanks so much again for coming on this episode.
Thanks for having me.